Taliban may actually crack down on al-Qaeda. They're certainly already fighting the Islamic State branch in Afghanistan, but have no interest potentially in a ceasefire or a deal with the Kabul government. And you end up with one of these decent interval kind of situations in which I don't know if the Taliban actually take power or the whole thing just falls apart into large-scale warfare, but you could imagine some really bad outcomes here. And I think this president is not who I would want leading that. I think on the one hand, he's shown his resolve to get out, right? On the other hand, if you want to kind of shape a better deal on the way out the door rather than a worse deal, you also want somebody who says, look, or we could stick around for a little while, right? And I think Trump has made it clear that he wants out before the election. And so I think that has just kind of dropped a lot of the leverage the U.S. might have, even relative to a president who also wants to get out, but is kind of less like sprinting absolutely for the exits.
So we have a lot of listeners who are fellow students here at Harris Public Policy. And we also have students who listen to this podcast who are at the military academies or junior military officers. And we were wondering, based on your research, what are some things that you would want both of those groups of students to know? Future civilian policymakers, future military policymakers.
So that's a really important question. There are, a million things we could say. I think what I would urge people to understand is how integrative strategy is. And it's really important for anybody who sees themselves as a future policymaker or analyst or, even an academic, as useless as we are, to understand all the different things that go into strategy and the threat and use of military force. So that means understanding kind of nitty-gritty military operational dynamics, means understanding bureaucratic politics. It means understanding kind of regional histories and why Japan and Korea, right, or South Korea are having all these issues that maybe if you don't know the history would make no sense. So I think that leads us to think outside of these silos, the intelligence community, the military, civilian policymakers, to think more broadly about all the way different pieces come together, in part because we've been talking a lot today about how when those things come out of alignment, when things get kind of disjointed, very bad unintended consequences can happen. There's always going to be some unintended consequences, some friction, but I think there are ways of keeping in mind the different moving pieces that can make those inevitable frictions less disastrous than they might otherwise be.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I'll go in a more personal recommendation route. So I think my main recommendation is to try to always keep your expertise and your sort of the bureaucracy that you become a part of at arm's length. And I think the way to do that for me, or the specific way I'd recommend, is read broadly. And so just like I said at the beginning about sort of the happy coincidence in my academic career of reading a sociologist and relating their sort of analysis of dinner table social norms to something I was reading about the Korean War, I really feel like, especially for people entering public policy or in military service, it's very difficult to get perspective from outside the cultures that you become a part of and make a career in. And reading broadly, whether it's reading from sort of disciplines that seem further afield than the ones that you directly come into contact, or if you're in the intelligence business, keeping, to the extent that you can, sort of in terms of your job security, keeping touch with people outside that world. That's the thing I worry about the most, and I think it is a loss of that. And I think, it's a time when you're in a master's program or you have a break in your military service for professional education, that you can do that, but don't lose it when you go back into the day-to-day grind, because it's something that will distinguish you from your colleagues and will oftentimes, I think, be something that helps make you unique and better at what you do. And B, I think it helps you avoid some of the dysfunctionalities or the downsides of becoming part of a monoculture. And so if you hear people threat hyping the problem of gray zone warfare, or, cyber's here, the sky is falling, like those things bother me. And I think you want to have voices from inside, not just, me coming on a podcast saying like, hey, let's keep this in perspective. And here's some reasons why this might not be the end of the world, or this buzzword might actually just be, sort of a recycled and repackaged version of something that's been around for a while, which is useful, for fighting for bureaucratic funds or getting attention for grand strategy challenges, but intellectually might need, a dose of variety. And so that's my thoughts.
And if I could just kind of pull some of those together, I think there are really strong incentives to specialize, whether you're in the military or in public service or in academia or anywhere else. And there are lots of advantages to that. But there are also some real disadvantages of becoming overly specialized because the world's constantly changing. Skills that were really useful 10 years ago may no longer be useful now. So you want to have kind of an intellectual reserve of kind of knowledge, the ability to reach outside of your specialization, and kind of a willingness and ability to pull in new information and kind of update yourself as the world changes or as your responsibilities change.
Well, Dr. Austin Carson and Dr. Paul Staniland, thank you so much for that advice. I know Thomas and I will be taking it as we move forward in our careers. And thank you for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Our pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us today on Thank You for Your Service. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at TYFYS_podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so you'll get our next episode as soon as it's released.
Thank You for Your Service is produced by Ashwarya Kumar, and our publisher is Haz Yano. This podcast is a production of the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts and is in no way intended to reflect the official positions of the Department of Defense or any other military entity. I'm Thomas Krasnation.
And I'm Nick Pareso. See you next time.